LUMIX is up to something, and if you're watching this video, I'm assuming you know that they've announced this camera right here, the LUMIX S1II, which is the latest camera in their full frame lineup. As you can see, I had the original S1 lineup. They have the S1H, S1R, and the S1, which this technically replaces. And also I have the S1R2, the LUMIX S1II X, and also the GH7. And we'll get into why I have the GH7 here a little bit later, but these two cameras share a really cool similarity, which we will dive into. So let's just go straight into it. The S1II is a 24 megapixel full frame camera with a new sensor design, partially stacked, which we've never seen from LUMIX before, so that's cool. And I think one of the main things that they seem to be going with this camera is about speed, operability, and functionality. They want to make this camera really easy to use. And I think if you're going for a hybrid camera, which some people criticize the S1R2 when that was announced for not being hybrid enough and being photocentric, but then having these really crazy video specs. Well, this is the hybrid camera that LUMIX is hanging their hat on. This is the camera that's supposed to be for everyone who wants to do a bit of everything. The S1R2, as I said in my first video about it, is a photocentric camera, and that's why it has a high resolution sensor. That's why it's not as fast in terms of rolling shutter, but that's also why it can shoot 8K video, which the S1R2 is designed for. The S1II isn't designed for. This maxes out at 6K, internal ProRes at 30 frames per second. But one of the new introductions with this camera, which you haven't seen from any of the others, which I really love and have found great use for, I've actually wanted it for quite a while, is 5.1K 60p video. So you've got full frame, open gate at 60 frames per second. And that is, for me, I wouldn't go as far as to say a game changer, but in terms of being able to shoot more and giving you more options when you're shooting open gate, having that frame rate to half speed your footage is hugely beneficial, especially if you shoot weddings or event type content. Anything where you're going to want to slow down the motion to give a bit more atmosphere and more emphasis, you've now got that with open gate in the S1II. So that for me is a reason to choose this camera over any of the others straight out of the gate, pun intended. Also, this camera has a stacked sensor, as I mentioned, so the readout speeds are a lot faster. It means it can do up to 240 frames per second full HD video in this camera. And you've got 4K 120 full readout, so you're not getting a unnecessary crop. I think it's a 1.24 windowing of the sensor, which you would get with any other full frame camera. So there's no difference here between using this or an FX3 or I don't know what else can do 4K 120 off the top of my head. But my point is you're getting the full read of the sensor for that window when it's shooting 4K 120. So that's brilliant. In case you didn't see my video or any other videos on the S1R Mark II, let's talk about the body design. You have a very similar body to the S1II X, but it is a little bit chunkier. Let's just take the lens off. It's a little bit chunkier than the S5 Mark II X, S1II, but a very, very similar design. One of the things I love most about the S1II is, and the S1R2, because it shares exactly the same body, they're identical, is it's gone for an evolved version of the flip out and tilt mechanism from the S1H and the GH7. And this time it not only tilts up, you can pull it out, then flip it. And my favorite configuration is the fact that you can tilt down as well vertically. So say if you were shooting someone like that and then you want to show your client the image, you don't have to have your client like awkwardly tilt their head. You can just tilt the screen downwards so you can see your portrait images while still holding the camera at a normal angle. And I just think it's subtle, but for me, I mean, I had this on a shoot a couple of weeks ago, and it was just one of those little quality of life things that this camera can do that other cameras don't, which just made it a little bit easier to show my clients the image on set. And I just loved being able to, I don't know. For me, it's the small things. At this level, when you're paying £2,000 plus for a camera, I'm looking for things that make my life easier. How do I get my job done with as few barriers as possible? And I think with every single one of these releases, LUMIX is finding ways to give you a bit more in terms of functionality. Looking around the body, you also have a record button on the front, you have a tally light on the front, a tally light on the back, and your record button here on the top, as you'd expect. You've got a custom function button on the front here. And then you have locking dials, which I love. And you also have a lock switch on the back there as well. So you can make sure that none of your settings change when you're in the middle of something, you've got it locked in how you want. Another thing I love, which we saw with the introduction of the S1R2, is the ability to switch between photo, video, and SNQ mode. And that would be enough if you just had the ability to switch between them. But one of the coolest things about it is when you choose your mode, whether it's photo, video, or SNQ, the settings that you apply and even the button mapping that you apply is saved to that mode. So you don't have to keep switching settings when you choose between photo and video. And that is huge, especially the button mapping, because I do tend to have slightly different button mapping for photo and stills. It's one of the hugest changes that we saw, for me at least, with the S1R2. Also, I love the rounded eye cup. I know it's a subtle difference, but it's going back to what we had with the S1 original series. It's a slightly smaller eye cup, granted, but I just think it's a nicer, more ergonomic feel compared to what we had with the S1II, which went for that kind of squared eye cup. I feel like they're less durable, more likely to get caught on things, and generally I think this smaller rounder eye cup works great. It is a 5.84 million dot viewfinder, which is super clear. I had no issues using that. The screen as well was really nice and bright, even in bright daylight. I had no issues with that at all. Ports, another thing that we saw introduced with the S1R2, which I'm a big fan of, and actually fed back to Lumix, so it's nice to see them listen, is individual port covers for the inputs. So you've got your HDMI, USB-C, your headphone jack input, and also microphone input. And those are individually covered, which it's just, again, it's all about quality of life. What makes this camera better to use for a professional? That is a small touch that makes a big difference to me when I'm using my cameras out and about, especially if I'm shooting near the ocean or if I'm shooting in inclement weather like I do often in the UK. So I think that's a nice touch as well. In terms of cards, we have CF Express Type B again, like we have with the S1R2, and also an SD card slot. So you've got the option of both. I think you also have the benefit of having CF Express Type B for your internal ProRes recording, your higher frame rate recording as well. So it's great to have the option of both slots for those particular needs depending on what you're shooting, and SD cards are readily available everywhere, so it's great to still have access to those card slots. The battery is the same BLK22 battery that we've had for a very long time, and I just think, again, in terms of quality of life, making things easier, having the same battery across S5II, S5IIX, GH7, all of these cameras use the same battery, and I just think that's a massive benefit to someone like me who uses multiple cameras. So it is great to see some consistency in terms of batteries. Just like the S1R Mark II, you can actually close your sensor. That's a setting you can turn on or off depending on how comfortable you feel with having the sensor shutter mechanism closed. But that just protects your sensor from dust or, unnecessary or accidental touches when you're changing lenses. When I'm using my camera in situations where I'm going to be changing lenses quite often, I tend to have this setting turned on so that the shutter is completely covered. But typically I wouldn't, if my camera was in transit, I wouldn't leave it locked down, because if it bumps awkwardly, it could cause some kind of issues with having that shutter mechanism shut down. I haven't experienced any issues with that, but just as a peace of mind thing, in transit, I would typically not have my shutter mechanism closed when the camera's not on. But it's just nice to have. I just think it's and it's super quick. It's a nice feature to have an option. Again, like I said, quality of life. They're giving you options to use your camera how you want and to get the features out of it that you like. Another thing that's great about this camera is it can record to SSD as well. So just like the S5IIX and S1R2 and GH7 all record straight to SSD with these cameras, which is, again, huge quality of life thing. It means when you're shooting at higher frame rates or higher bit depths, you've got access to much more affordable media. CF Express Type B 1 terabyte cards are a lot more expensive than 2 terabyte SSD drives, for example. Also, in terms of heat dissipation, CF Express Type B cards get hot, a lot hotter than SD cards. And if you're shooting for extended periods, or if you're shooting outside in a warm environment, then you might want to choose SSD cards just in terms of the reliability and to reduce your overheating. And I did, as I like to do in the types of environments that I shoot in, controlled studio or indoor environments, I did test it to see how hot it does get and at what points it will overheat and in what formats it will overheat. In real world use, I didn't experience any overheating, not even overheating warnings. And that was using it all day in the sun, recording a mixture of video and stills. I had more, my battery ran out before the camera would get anything close to hot enough to overheat. So that is something that gives me a lot of confidence using this camera in the real world. In terms of pushing it and stress testing it, leaving it on mains power and recording internal ProRes 5K 30p video, its max resolution, internal raw HQ, I managed to get about 45 to 50 minutes before the camera would overheat. I managed to get the camera to roll for about 45 to 50 minutes before it had to shut down due to overheating. And like I said, that is running on mains power, recording to CF Express Type B, and also just constantly. So I would fill a 1 terabyte card. When the card got full, I'd pull it out, put in another 1 terabyte card, and just keep rolling. And it did that 3 times, but on the third card, about 5 minutes in, it had the warning and it overheated. But that is 2 terabytes of footage with no overheating. So about 45 minutes of straight recording, which I think is very, very respectable. And it took about 5 to 6 minutes to cool down and then it was ready to roll again. The camera did also overheat while shooting 4K 120 at about 40 to 45 minutes, which is close to when the battery would run out anyway, because I would get about 50 minutes of solid recording from a single battery anyway, 50 to 55 minutes of recording. So I mean, I don't know why anyone would want to shoot 4K 120 for more than... Why would you shoot 4K 120 for more than half an hour? That just, for me, that just seems like an insane amount of footage to slow down. I don't know why anyone would want to do it. Most of the time when we're shooting 4K 120, we want short clips that we can extend for dramatic effect, unless you're Zack Snyder. The temperature at which the camera decided it couldn't operate safely anymore was 55.3 degrees Celsius, or... Let me find out what that is for you Americans. I'm not good at maths. 55 C in Fahrenheit is 131 degrees Fahrenheit, which you shouldn't be outside filming in anyway. So 55.3 degrees Celsius or 131 degrees F Fahrenheit, I think that is crazy respectable. For this camera to be able to operate up to that temperature is, again, very reassuring as a professional. I wasn't able to get it to overheat in real world use, and in a stress condition, it operated at a temperature that I wouldn't feel comfortable working in either. So that is very, very impressive. Battery life. Recording high resolution video and a mixture of stills, I would get through about maybe 2 or 3 batteries in a full day. That's obviously turning the camera off sometimes and leaving it to go into standby. But 2 to 3 batteries that are the size of these, that is not an issue to carry a couple of these in your backpack or in a pocket. I actually keep mine in this pocket here or in these pockets, which is why I wear the vest. But yeah, 3 batteries for a full day, not an issue with that. If I was recording something constant, so like a lot of interviews, I'd probably want to carry about 5 to 6 batteries with me, or even a power bank. You can carry a power bank and charge the camera from that. So you've got a lot of options in terms of powering on the go. And as I mentioned before, you can power it from mains. So that's for people like me who record podcasts, long form content, then you can just leave it powered on mains, which is, again, a great benefit to have. Let's dive into some of the new features that they've introduced with the S1II, which for some people may not be a big deal, but again, I'm talking about small improvements that make a big difference. Here you've got Bluetooth sync timecode, which I absolutely love. A new feature that we didn't have before. It's in the menu and you can choose Bluetooth sync. You can also connect it to your DJI gimbal via Bluetooth or within the menu. I think that's a great feature to have. They promise up to 15 plus stops of dynamic range. and it has a dynamic range boost mode in the S1II, which is different to dynamic expansion in the S1R2. Dynamic range boost is the first full frame implementation of dual gain output that we've seen from Lumix. We've seen it before in ARRI and in the Canon C80 and C300 Mark III, but dual gain output basically means, and we have it in the GH7, so first time in full frame for Lumix. But dual gain output basically means that the sensor is read twice, once for saturation in highlights, once for information in the shadows, and then combined to create an image that is extremely robust, much better in the shadows, much cleaner shadows, and much better detail and color information in your highlights, so much more recoverability if you're shooting a high dynamic range scene. And that is the first time we're seeing it in full frame from Lumix. So I think that is a huge feature to have. I haven't seen it mentioned much in the marketing materials, but obviously you have the trade-off is you get a slower rolling shutter. But if you're shooting a static scene with a beautiful sunrise, for example, stick on dynamic range boost and you're going to get much better information in the camera, especially to work with in post. So I think that is huge. The S1II also has dual native ISO with the low setting at 640 and the high at 5000. Also, check out my friend Josh Cameron's YouTube channel. He created this super handy cheat sheet with all of the Lumix S series dual native ISO values. So you can pause the screen here if you need to save those, but it's really handy just to have them on screen for you guys to check out. Also, you can see in this clip here just how clean the footage gets from ISO 4000, and then you switch to the high base ISO of 5000. It cleans the footage right up. A YouTuber by the name of Mr. Camera said that he overexposed his camera by 7 stops and was still able to recover color information in the highlights, which I think is crazy impressive. I didn't test it to that extent, but check out his YouTube channel, Mr. Camera. He is French speaking, but his content is absolutely brilliant. So make sure you check out his channel for that. Shout out to him for the information on that test. False color is also built into the S1II, like we saw with the S1R2, great to have. We also have a new feature which I'm very impressed by, and again, quality of life. You can now back up your SD card or your CF Express card to SSD in the camera. So again, for peace of mind, if you've done a whole shoot day, you've shot a wedding, and you want to do a backup, and you don't have your laptop with you because you're traveling light, or just you don't have your laptop with you, you can now, there's an option within the menu of the S1II where you can connect your SSD drive and pull your images and videos across to SSD. And I think for about 150 gig of content, you're looking at maybe 15 minutes, 16 minutes of transfer time, depending on the SSD drive that you're using. I use the SanDisk Extreme SSDs, and I got about 15 minutes for about 150 gigabytes of footage and stills and video. So I think that is a huge benefit. And again, quality of life, that's great to have, because for peace of mind, I always like to do a backup before I finish packing away everything. And sometimes I don't have my laptop with me and I have that kind of nervous, where do I store my cards to make sure they're double safe? So I think being able to back up your content to SSD is going to be a huge feature for some people over others. But for me, that's massive. There are, of course, improvements to autofocus in higher frame rate recording, but also they've introduced an entirely new autofocus mode, which is called Urban Sports AF, which seems to be designed for breakdancing scenes or for BMX or skating. The camera can detect those types of scenes. So for example, if you've got a couple of people dancing with a crowd of people behind them, the camera has been trained to see that and focus on the dancers and not get distracted by people standing in the background, which for some people, the type of stuff that you might shoot, that might be a huge benefit. One thing to note that I did feedback to Lumix while I was in Lisbon for the launch is they had 3 breakdancers at the launch. One of them was female. And I noticed when the male dancers were doing their thing, breakdancing, the camera was rock steady. It detected them and stayed with them the entire time. But when the female breakdancer was doing her thing, the camera would sometimes drift to the men in the background. And I'm not calling out Lumix for anything particularly controversial here, but it's likely that the data set they were using to train their autofocus system included more male breakdancers than female breakdancers. And that's just one of the problems that we have generally with AI and algorithms. They're only as good as the data that they're fed, and they carry the biases of the people that create the content and also the people that are involved in the content. So there are typically more male breakdancers, so they're going to be more male breakdancers in the data set. So I fed that back to Lumix, and they said they're going to have a look at that and see if there's something they can improve there, because we don't want to lose focus when shooting any of our dancers, whether they're male or female. So I think that's just an interesting thing that I noticed while testing out the camera. In terms of stills, actually, in that scenario, you can now shoot up to 70 frames per second blackout free with autofocus using this camera, which I think is insane. It's completely overkill for most circumstances, but in terms of testing it, I was really impressed. I expected to miss a lot more shots than I did. In fact, the shots that I missed were more me failing to anticipate the movement of the BMX riders or the dancers. So I was moving kind of ahead. I was anticipating their movement and not going in the right direction. So the autofocus maybe missed at those points. But while I was locked off and they were in frame, the camera stuck with them and nailed every single shot for 70 frames a second, which you don't need that many. If you need that many shots to get the shot, I mean, you just don't need that many shots. But if you're shooting particular sequences, maybe that'd be really cool creatively to have that many frames to break something down. And that is in the super high boost mode. You can also shoot 60 frames per second with dynamic range and image priority as well. In terms of mechanical shutter, you got up to 10 frames per second, which is the same in the S1II as well. So no real difference there, but full autofocus, and it is brilliant. I was really impressed with the stills focusing capabilities of this camera. And in terms of subject detection, if you aren't aware, and this is the first time seeing your video about a Lumix camera, you have human detection, animal, car, motorcycle or bike, train and airplane AF. And just to mention, the new urban sports AF detection mode is in the human section. Lumix is famed for its image stabilization, and it is again improved in the S1II. They now offer up to 8 stops of correction for movement, which is crazy stable in every scenario that I tested it in. So who is this camera for? People have been asking for a successor to the S1H for the longest time, and we got the S1R Mark II instead. So people seemed, at least on the comments and what I've seen in the conversation online, people were disappointed that there wasn't an S1H Mark II when that was announced. Now with the S1II, Lumix, like I said, seemed to be moving in the direction of quality of life. How do we make these cameras easier and more flexible for each user to use the camera how they see fit? And I just don't see what more I could want from a hybrid camera at this price point. You've got internal ProRes video. You've got 5K open gate 60p, 4K 120 with no crop, you've got 241 4K video, 120, 10-bit, so for a great, beautiful windowed frame, if you wanted to shoot like that, you've got that straight in the camera. You've got SSD recording, you've got SSD camera backup, you've got false color, you have 70 frames per second, blackout free, still shooting with electronic shutter and full AF, 10 frames per second mechanical shutter with full AF, which I think really is as good as I need. I know what I'm shooting when I'm shooting at high frame rate, so I don't need anything faster than 10 frames per second mechanical anyway. You've got a photo, video, S&Q switch, high resolution mode. I didn't even mention high resolution mode. You can shoot high resolution mode handheld, which will give you 96 megapixel frames from this camera as well. CF Express Type B and SD card slots. It doesn't overheat in any circumstances that I experience in the real world. It will overheat if you push it to at 55 degrees C or 131 degrees Fahrenheit, which again is extremely hot. This camera is a workhorse. It's very versatile. I just don't know what more you would want from a camera at this price point. What else do you want? It's not going to have internal NDs and be this size and this price. It's not going to be able to shoot 8K 120 in this price point and at this size. What else do you want from a camera at this point? I'm not saying it's perfect, because I mean, no camera is perfect, but for me, there is nothing missing here. at 2,800 or 2,900 pounds, I think the UK price is, or 3,000. How much is it in Europe? I'm not even going to get into American prices because America. But at 3,500 euros and about 2,900 pounds, I don't know what more you can expect from a camera. This will deliver in spades whether you're shooting stills or video. The only reason I would get an S1R Mark II is if I needed higher resolution, which sometimes I do, which is why I have this camera. I don't necessarily need 8K, but 8K open gate is coming to the S1R2, which is great. But it can shoot 8K video as well. And then you've got 44 megapixel stills with the S1R2 or 24 megapixel stills with the S1. Why would I choose the S1II over the original S1? Or if I had the S1 and I wanted an upgrade, why would I go for the S1II? Some people like the larger body, so that might be a slight deal breaker. It isn't that much larger, but it is a bit taller, feels a bit heftier in the hand. So some people may still prefer the older, larger bodies, but you're getting so much more in the S1II in terms of usability. The screen mechanism is night and day versus what you get with the S1. This just flips up and also tilts up like that, which is kind of useful, but nothing like what you get with the S1II, which can flip all the way around and in every direction imaginable. So usability, I think the S1II offers a lot more. You've got no screen on the top, which again, some people will miss. I like the screens, but not enough to prefer it over having my mode dial on one side and my drive dial on the other. I think for me, this is a better design. And I've also got the photo video switch on the side here. I have a record button on the front, which we don't have on the S1. I also just generally think the stabilization, autofocus, you're again night and day between the S1 and S1II. The camera is a lot faster to operate than the S1. So in terms of turn on time, this is almost instant. That is about 2 seconds maybe at a cold start, which some people will find a big turn off. So the S1II for me represents a genuine upgrade over the S1. Also, your maximum frame rates at open gate is 30p here. You've got 5.4K 30p 420 10-bit. This is 5.9K 60p 420 color. So you get much more in terms of camera. Same resolution though. So just stills, they both shoot 24 megapixels. Nothing really to choose between them. But you do have 70 frames per second, blackout-free, electronic shutter versus 30 frames per second. The buffer on this would fill up after about 2 seconds. So that's about 140 frames before it would buffer. This was about 75. So the buffer rate is about double on the S1II versus the original S1. So yeah, I think if you're looking for an upgrade over the S1, S1II makes a lot of sense. If you're looking at the S5IIX, then that is a slightly different conversation because there are some similarities across the two. But again, in terms of functionality, I think this is a much more functional body in terms of you've got the record buttons on the front, you've got tally lights, you've got the individual covers on the ports, a much more flexible screen. Also, this will record internal ProRes. S5IIX can't do that. It can only do that to SSD. This will record up to 240 frames per second, 422 10-bit video in the S1II. S5IIX can record 120 frames per second, 422 10-bit in full HD. This also does open gate up to 60 frames per second. This is open gate up to 30 frames per second. So I think, yeah, the S1II, again, offers you some really, for me, some real meaningful extras over the S5IIX. And obviously it can do that because it has a slightly more powerful processor and it records to CF Express Type B, whereas the S5IIX only records to dual SD card slots. So it can't match the capabilities of S1II or even S1R2 when it comes to video. And also actually, I just like having the photo video switch. I think that's a quality of life thing that is a big improvement over this model. If you're more video focused, the GH7 isn't a bad camera to consider when you're comparing the two because you have the dual gain output from the sensor. So similarly, very clean, recoverable highlights and shadows. You're gonna get amazing quality out of the GH7 in terms of video. They both do 240 frames per second as well, full HD, and both do 4K 120 without a crop. So I guess if you're choosing between GH7 and the S1II, it's more to do with whether you prefer the full frame look over micro four thirds, and also if you want a true hybrid camera that has a high resolution full frame stills camera in it as well, then the S1II would be where I'd go. But if you're more video centric, you do get a lot of similarities across the two. So I wouldn't write off the GH7. Also, both have the internal 32-bit float audio when you pair them with the DMW XLR2 camera module. So you can record 32-bit float audio with both of these cameras as well. Aerolog C3 is an optional extra. You also get that both with the GH7 and with the S1II. You don't get that with S5IIX. So GH7 is also a good camera to consider if you're more video centric, and I love it. I think the GH7 is a brilliant camera, but if you need a hybrid, the S1II ticks so many boxes that I've struggled to find, I would struggle to find negatives with it. And like I said, it's not perfect. There are instances where I would prefer to use the S1R2 or GH7. I can't think of many instances where I would use the S5IIX now, which is a shame because I love that camera, but it may have to be given away at some point now that I have this, because there are so many things that, I mean, I can't think of anything the S5IIX does that the S1II doesn't. But yeah, the S1II ticks a lot of boxes. Anyway, I feel like I'm rambling now. If you have any comments or questions, please put them in the comment section below. I hope I've answered some questions for you guys. If I haven't, I apologize. I'll try and do better next time. Please give me feedback and I will improve. But yeah, I'll see you guys in another video. Thanks for watching.